Okay guys, we are done with our character design. Alright, so the first thing we have to get into right now is creating our rig. We'll start rigging this character. Okay, so off camera I added a little bit more details. The little hair, all this hair around here, I added them off camera just so I can save us the stress of doing it while recording, because right now I just want us to get straight into our character rigging. Okay, so let's start rigging our character. All right, so now that we are rigging, we're ready to start rigging. Let me confirm if my recording is working. Okay, everything is fine. All right, so from our character, let me reset the cropping for this. So I'll reset the crop and I'll move her completely out of the way. All right, so that I can see. Let me reduce the size of this. I'll just crop all this out. Okay, so I'll just fix her hair on the other side rather, so that I'm sure of where to fix in my bones and all those stuff. So let's start with the main rig. So I'll start with adding bone. So I'm going to add somewhere here. I'll assume that her waist is somewhere here, so I'm going to add this bone and I'm going to call it my base bone. So this is my base. This is going to be like the primary bone. Alright, so on the base bone I'm going to add 2 bones for the torso, one from here to here. Two bones, one from here to here, and then one from here to the neck. Okay, so I want to make sure my bones are all well centralized, so I'm going to push this out. Maybe I can enable my grid once more, and then I'll position my character right at the center of the I'll use my control key to make sure my character is positioned somewhere right at the center of the grid. Okay, and my bones are well positioned. I can turn off the grid for now, then I'll continue adding my bones. Okay, so I'll add the neck bone. I want it to extend to somewhere here. Right, then I'll add my head bone. Alright, so let's do for the arms. So for the arms, I'm going to select the chest bone and just call this chest, call this abdomen, chest, abdomen. Then on the chest bone, I'm going to start adding the bone for the arm. Right, so this is very sensitive, so I'm going to first decide where the shoulders are. Right, so let's first decide where we want our shoulders to be. Alright, so our shoulders should be somewhere here. This is actually the shoulder. Okay, so if she's going to lift her hands, I want her to lift the point to be somewhere here, so she can lift her hands up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to position this to somewhere here. Let's do it for both sides so it can be accurate. Okay, I'm going to select this point, Control Shift to select this point, I'm going to push them in. Right, so let me reposition this to somewhere here. because I want the shoulders to be positioned just somewhere where I think the pivots of the hand should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this up, and then I'll pull this up as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue to add our bones. So at this point, I'll select this chest bone, then I'm going to add a pin bone, and then on the pin bone I'm going to add my the upper arm bone. On the upper arm bone I'm going to add another pin bone, then I'll continue to add the lower arm bone, and then at this point I'm going to add a pin bone. I'll stop there for now. Okay, so I'll select this chest bone once more. Then somewhere here I'm going to add my other pin bone. On this pin bone I'm going to add the upper arm bone, add a pin bone, add the lower arm bone, then add a pin bone, and that will be that for now. Okay, so let's ensure that our bones are positioned correctly. So I'll select this bone, select the transform bone tools. Then let's check and see if everything is fine. Okay, so this particular value here, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to select this bone, select the transform bone tools. I'm going to paste the same value, paste. Alright, then I'm going to put a negative in front of it, just so I'm sure that they are both on the same side, right? And then I'm going to select this, the transform bone, select the X value, copy it, then paste it for this as well. Paste it here. Right, just so that I'm sure that the position of these symbols are opposite and equal to each other. Equal and opposite. Okay guys, so let's proceed. Let's add the bone for the legs. Alright, so I'm going to just use my add bone, select the base bone, then I'm going to add one bone for the foot, for the leg, add a pin bone. Okay, so on this pin bone I'm going to add another bone all the way down here, and then here I'm going to add a pin bone, then add my foot bone. Alright, so we'll go back, select the base, add another bone, add a pin bone, continue to the foot, make sure this is in the right at the center, add a pin bone, then add the bone for the foot. Okay guys, so first let's ensure that this our bone is positioned just somewhere that just like somewhere at the middle of this circle that we have here. So I'll go ahead and I'll push this bone back a little bit more, then I'll push this up just to meet. Let's ensure that it's just somewhere at this middle. Right, so that means we'll have to adjust this as well. I have to bring this down. Okay, that's fine. Let's do the same for the other leg. push this up. I'm going to pull this so that it's somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to add a pin bone here. Bone, add a pin bone. I want a pin bone to be somewhere here, right? Because this is going to be the position. I want the position of the two pin bones to be exactly the same. So I'm going to add parent this to the pin bone. All right, so on this bone, I'll also add another pin bone. All right, and then I'll make sure this is parented to the pin bone instead. All right, and then I'll push this up, make sure it's at the same position with this pin bone. That will need me to pull this back, pull this down. Right guys, so we have that. Next now, what I'll do is I'll make sure that the position of this pin bone, so I'm going to copy the value, the Y value for this bone, copy it, copy, then I'll paste it here, paste, and I'll remove the negative sign. Okay, all right, make sure the two Y values are the same. Then the X value for this, I think I'll use this as my reference. Copy the X value, copy, paste it here, and then paste it for this. See, they are exactly at the same place. Then I'll just delete the negative sign. All right, so both of them are equal and opposite to each other. So I'll have to come back and adjust this. I'll reduce the scale for this. Let's do the same thing for this guy as well. So I'll select this bone. I'll select this bone, and then I'll check the X value. I'll copy it. Then the X value for this, I'll paste this in. V to paste the X value for it, so you can see both the two bones are exactly at the same point. I will remove all this. Okay guys, so you can see the bones are exactly at the same place, so I'll just come back and adjust this as well. So what I'm trying to ensure is that the position of this pin bone is the same thing as the position of this pin bone, and the position of this pin bone is exactly the same thing as the position of this pin bone. So I think everything is set. Right, so let's do binding. Let's bind the layers to the bones. So I'll select the head, use the bind layer tool, I'll bind it to this bone. I'll select the neck. For the neck, I'm going to add some points here. So I'll add a point right. I'll just add a point here. Add a point here. Alright, so for the neck, I'm going to be doing points binding. So I'll first select this bone. This bone I'll just name it the head bone. And then I'll select the bind points tool. Then select just this point at here. Click bind, enter to bind. Then select the neck bone, name it the neck bone. And then I'll use the bind point to select just the points here. Then bind. Then finally I'll select the chest bone and use the bind point to bind just this point. Alright, so let's just test. This is the first time we'll be testing out our bones. Let's test and see. Okay guys, you can see that the head is well bound to the neck. Okay. Right, next thing I want to do is, before I continue, is I want to remove the bone strength for all of my bones. I don't use bone strength. So I'll select all the bones, select bone strength, and set them all to 0. Okay, so I want just the parts that are bounded to a bone to be moving. Right? So let's proceed. There's something I want to do to the neck. So for this neck, I want to add a few more points. So I'll add a point here and a point here. And I'll bind it to this bone, to the chest bone. Chest bone. Right, so I'll just select these points, click enter, because I don't want. So right, so we want the neck to rotate at this point, not beneath it. Okay guys, let's proceed. Let's get to the torso. So from the torso, for the graphic, I'm going to do a point binding. So I'll select the upper part, select the chest bone, select the bind point, and bind just this point. Right, so okay, I'll bind these points and these points. Okay, then I'll select the abdomen bone, then bind the points that are within its jurisdiction. Around here, bind, and then I'll select the base bone, select the bind points to, then bind just the points here beneath. Click enter to bind. Then get to the mask. On the mask, I'm going to add in a few more points. So I'll add a point here, add a point here. Right, so let's start binding. I'll select this bone, bind points, just bind all the points within the bone's jurisdiction. Select this bone, and I'll bind just the points here, just these 2 points. Click enter. Then I'll select the base bone, then I'll bind the points here. Okay, and okay, so let's select this back clothes, and I'll just use the bind layer to bind layer to, and select the base bone, because we want the entire layer to be bound to this bone. Alright, so let's proceed to the legs. Right, so for these legs, I'm going to drag her a bit higher and wider. And the point here, so that this is like the butt. Okay. Okay, so I'll be binding this entire layer to this bone. So let me just select. Okay, oops, let's do bind points. So I'll select this bone. Then I'll bind these points. Just select the points, the tie, bind it to this bone. I'll select this bone, then select these points. Right, select this lower part of the leg, click enter. Okay, so we're down here. Right, so I'll select these points as well, and these points. Select everything except the foot and enter. They are bound to this bone. Then the foot, the entire foot, I'll just bind the entire foot layer. I'll just bind it to this layer. Okay guys, let's proceed. Come over to this other leg. We'll do what we did for the other. Select this point, push it up, scale it, position it, add the points, increase the curvature. Okay, so we select this bone, select the bind points. I'm using shortcuts to get there easily. Then I'll select just this upper part, enter. Right, so I'll select this bone, I'll select this, use the bind point, select this point, bind, then the foot, select the entire foot layer and bind it with this bone. So now let's test our, okay, we have just one more point that we have not bound, that's the back hair. So let's bind the back hair as well. So I'll select the back hair, select this bone, then I'll select all the points, select all these points from here through here, then I'll bind. Let me add one more point here. Okay, let's select the bone once again to see the points. The good thing is that once you select a bone, you see the points that are bounded to that bone. So I'll select the neck, I'll select all the points from here down here to this point, then I'll bind. I don't want to select points that are lower than the point, so let me just select these ones, bind them. Then I'll select the chest bone, then I'll select all these points to this point, then I'll bind them. I'll select the base, then I'll select these points and bind them. Alright guys, so let's check and see if our binding is working. Okay, so as you can see, it seems to be working fine. Okay, we're yet to bind the arms, so I think we can do that. And we have an issue with the parenting here. This bone is not parented to any bone. It's supposed to be parented to this bone here. Okay, so let's see that once again. Right, so good. Except for the arms, which we're going to bind shortly. Alright, so let's bind the arms. So I'll select this bone, select this. I'm going to add a point here. Add a point. Oops. It's supposed to be on frame 1, so I'll just delete that point. Want a point here, and here. One point there so that there could be a pivot somewhere. So bind. So bind all the points from here all through to this place to bind up to this upper bone. Then the lower bone will bind all these points all the way to this place, bind them to this bone. Okay, so for now we'll just bind our arm to this bone. Okay, so let's do the same for this other part. So let's add our points. Pivot points should be here, here, and here. Select this bone, bind all these points, enter. Select the next bone, bind the points lower to it, enter. Then select the hand, use the bind layer to bind it to this pin bone. We'll get to the hand later. So on frame 1, let's test and see everything is working fine. Okay. That's cool. Of course, I knew we'll be having an issue with this. So we'll go in and work on that. We're going to have to do some extension. So let's extend this. This part, we're going to add a few more points here to extend it. Let's do the same for the other side. We have to extend this. So let's see what we got. So I think this is fair enough. Let's see what we have here. I think this is also okay. Okay, so we can still work on this pivot later, but we just stick with what we have right now. Okay guys, so that's basically it for the rigging. Alright, so we see everything is well rigged, the hands, the legs. Let me reduce the constraints for this head because I don't want it to rotate in an unusual way. So I'll just come here and open up the constraints. I'll drop this to 45 degrees on both sides. Drop this to 45 as well. Right, so that we can not have it rotating in an abnormal way. Okay, that's it guys. So in the next video, we'll look at how we'll start getting into more complex things like giving it a head rotation, right? Let's start getting into more exciting things. So in the next tutorial, let's get into our head rotation.